The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy. I have a series of questions I ask myself before every talk as part of the outline. And the first one is really the most important. The first one is, why is this topic important? And generally, I always have this sense of this is the most important thing. And I wanted to talk about what it means to let go, which in many ways is the most important thing. It's kind of the essence of what this practice is about. So I thought I'd start off with a little Zen story, which means it's not very funny, but it makes some Zen point. It is not uncommon for Zen meditation students to keep in regular contact with their teachers concerning their spiritual progress. In this particular story, a Zen student has a penchant for writing to his teacher monthly with an account of his development. His letters began to take a mystical turn when he wrote, "I am experiencing a oneness with the universe." When his teacher received this letter, he glanced at it and threw it away. The next month, the student wrote, "I have discovered that the divine is present in everything." His teacher used this letter to start a fire. A month later, the student had become even more ecstatic and wrote, "The mystery of the one and many has revealed itself to my wonderment," at which point his teacher yawned. The following month, another letter arrived which simply said, "There is no self, no one is born, and no one dies." At this, his teacher threw up his hands in despair. After the fourth letter, the student stopped writing to his teacher, and after a year had passed, the teacher began to feel concerned and wrote to his student asking to be kept informed of his spiritual progress. The student wrote back with the words, "Who cares?" When the teacher read this, he smiled and said, "At last, he finally got it." And I think what that's talking about is letting go of our concepts of what spirituality is all about. I'd like to talk about tonight what is it about the inability to let go, the holding on that oftentimes is below the line of awareness. There's something unconsciously holding on, and to talk about what happens when you let go a little bit. How do we do that? And I'd also like to talk about what happens when you let go a lot. What does it mean to let go completely? What do the teachings have to say about that? How far can you take out the practice of letting go? And it's fascinating when we really look at the nature of your stress and your suffering. Anything you're complaining about in your life, there's something holding on. There's some form of attachment, there's some form of identification. And that runs really, really deep. I remember reading a story that just really got my heart. And it was a story in a courtroom where a mother of a very, very young child had been unimaginably abusive to the child. And it was ridiculously clear how unfit she was and the harm she'd done to this very, very small child. So it was determined in the courtroom that the mother was not by any means capable. And yet when they took the child away, the child cried for the mother. What is it that holds us back from letting go? We cling to what we know, and we're afraid of what we don't know. We're terrified of what we don't know. There's story, again, it's not a funny one, but this guy falls over a cliff. He's hanging on by a root. And there are people down below, and they can see he's only 8 inches from the ground. And everyone is telling him, it's okay, you can let go, it's really going to be okay. But he's so terrified that he can't let go, even though we could see it was only that much. In that same way, there is so much we don't know. So we cling to what we do know and to our identifications. In the kind of the Buddhist language, they talk of like they have this translation. I'm sure it's not a literal translation, but the ones I've been reading say, the ordinary run-of-the-mill person. So if you're an ordinary run-of-the-mill person, you assume that your body is yours. You assume your thoughts and your emotions and your beliefs are yours, and you assume they're permanent. And of course, when we begin to look closer, through this lens of non-judging awareness or meditation, we see that actually all of this is impermanent. It's all transient. And it points back toward, well, what is there that isn't changing in our experience? And so we calcify around this self. And I love in yoga philosophy the description of the kleshas, of how we form this tightly bound self and why it's so hard to let go. And the first mistake, if you will, it's in Sanskrit it's called avidya, or really literally wrong knowledge, is you believe you're separate. And of course it begins as soon as those big people call you this name over and over and over again, and you realize that name is you. So there's this a sense of separateness. The next thing we do is we start gathering all the information that reinforces the sense of who we are as this separate, unique being. And then as we go through life, based on who we think we are as this separate being, we develop our list of our likes and our dislikes. Here are the things I like, here are the things I don't like. And as life goes on, you have more and more things you like and more things you don't like. And, and as I've mentioned before, you may have noticed as people get up there in age, the bandwidth of where they're actually happy gets more and more narrow, because the list of likes and dislikes has crowded out life. And then the final grip in this particular model is the fear of death. Because what if you've invested all of your life force into the story of who you are as a separate being, and it's all going away? Which is why quite often these transformational practices of meditation and yoga and all the other forms of practice are referred to as dying while alive. Because you see an aversion, and then you look closely at it, and you realize that you can actually sometimes let it go, or you can let it be. You're not run by those fears necessarily. You're not necessarily run by all of your desires, and you can sense there's a capacity in there to let go. And as the saying goes, if you let go a little bit, you'll have a little bit of freedom. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of inner freedom. And hypothetically, if you let go completely, you'll have complete freedom. So when I look out and I read these horrific headlines that are going on, and the polarization that's going on, is that so many of us, myself included, we get very calcified around our point of view. And we cannot imagine or validate another person's point of view because we're so tightly bound by our own. And so it becomes a really interesting inquiry. How do you let go? And different traditions will tell you different ways. One tradition, which informs all the different other traditions, is the tradition of renunciation. The world is full of illusion. Don't go there. Be a monastic, be a renunciate. Don't engage, because it's just going to mess you up. And as I've said, shared before, no car problems. No relationship problems. And then the other approach is, and it's more of a question, can you let go and still be engaged in your life in a really powerful and dynamic way? And this points toward the whole principle of the bodhisattva or the arahant in the Buddhist tradition, where you're awake and yet you're engaged and you're actively serving and being present in your life. Or in yoga philosophy, the concept of the jivan mukti, where you're fully engaged in your relationships and your commitments and your responsibilities, and you're cultivating an unbroken connection to presence, an unbroken connection to spirit. Is that possible? And so we all know we have to let go to some degree. We're all aware there's something that's binding you. And the question is, how do you do that? How do you know when you know you should let go, but you can't let go of what you need to do to let go, in other words? And I believe I've shared this story before, but it really struck me. I was once doing a very intensive program, and one of those really rigorous, you have to sit in your seat for 10 hours a day and someone's pounding on you. Kind of in the tradition of est, And the person who was really very, very, very dynamic teacher, he kept being interrupted by this woman who kept saying, well, but I don't understand. When I got divorced, my husband said this, and why would he do that to me? And he tried to answer that question, and then later on, she would interrupt and she would say, but when I went through my divorce, and probably about 5 or 6 times, she would interrupt and she had this question about her divorce and how much she was struggling with it and so forth. And everyone was getting a little bit irritated because she was so insistent. And then for the 6th or 7th time, when she would say, and my husband would never, ever do this. And he said, ma'am, excuse me. She said, how long ago was your divorce? And she said, 37 years. I thought, my gosh. And the question is, as much as I was appalled by that, it actually became quite a mirror. How many stories of resentment and hurt just keep cycling through again and again and again? How many little stories of complaints or victimization do I have that are just unresolved and just keep on spinning? And there are these just familiar stories. Have you ever had that experience of, being with your family at the holidays and there's someone telling the story exactly the same way they told the story last year and the year before and the year before, these sort of like calcified grooves that we have? The good news is that we can let go. And when you begin to really slow down, and when you begin to really cultivate non-judging awareness, everything that's undigested in your life is going to find you. It's just going to come to the surface. And so I'd like to share with you a sutta. And the word sutta, it's a teaching. And in Sanskrit, the word is sutra. So sutta and Pali sutra. And they're actually it's actually in reference to a thread. So there are these threads that kind of like sort of pull it all together. This is sometimes called the letting go sutta. And in these suttas, there's a lot of repetition, and it can get a little bit mind-numbing. So I'm going to do a little editing as I go along here. But I'd like to give you a taste of this particular sutta. And again, it's about letting go, but in a particular way. Because we've talked before about how does your experience arise? And what is your experience of life? And I love to see it as this causality of phenomena. At the very, very base is just undifferentiated energy. It's not good or bad. The energy arises, this life force, if you will, and without you being aware of it, you will experience it in one of three ways. There's energy that feels good, energy that feels bad, and energy that feels neutral. Then arising from there will be a thought. I like this, I don't like this, this reminds me of that, why does this always happen to me, etc., etc. If you're not aware of the thoughts, and you think those thoughts again and again and again and again and again, your thoughts harden into beliefs. And if you're not aware of how the beliefs are running your life, they form your habits. And if you're not aware of your habits, they form your character. And if you're not aware of your character, that becomes your destiny. So you can hang out on a level of thoughts and beliefs, which can be very, very interesting and helpful. But in this direct experience of mindfulness of the body, what we're doing is we're bringing the attention back to that raw experience of what's happening here and now. So this particular sutta speaks of being intimately awake in the senses and then exploring your relationship to what is there. So if you like, you can close your eyes. Whatever is not yours, let go of it. Letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. And what is not yours? What you see is not yours. Let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. The form of your body is not yours. What arises as either pleasure or as pain, or as neither pleasure nor pain, that too is not yours. Let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. What you hear is not yours. Let go of it. What you smell is not yours. Let go of it. What you taste is not yours. Let go of it. Your body is not yours. Let go of it. Your intellect is not yours. Let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. Ideas are not yours. Let go of them. Consciousness is not yours. Whatever arises in the intellect, experienced as pleasure or pain, or as neither pleasure nor pain, that too is not yours. Let go of it. These things which are not yourself, let go of them. Your letting go will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the intellect, consciousness is not yours. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. So as you're ready, you can just sense anything that may have shifted, what's present for you. And then as you're ready, you can deepen your breath and you can open your eyes. That's a pretty radical, hardcore practice. That everything you experience in this body is not yours. The mistake we make is when we believe it is. As the Buddha said, nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. It's directly linked to your capacity for long-term happiness. So the question becomes, what about all the worldly hurts? What about the disappointments in life? What about forgiving others for the wrong they've done us? What about forgiving ourselves for how unskillful we've been in the world? How do you work that stuff? Which is important. I always think of Sokni Rinpoche, who's a really wonderful teacher. And whenever a phone rings in a meditation hall, he always says, I hope it's good news. So there's something called premature transcendence, or spiritual bypassing. And so it's very easy to try to let go before you really let go, or to try to forgive when you haven't really forgiven. And as we explored recently about forgiveness, that part of the key in forgiveness is not to pass over the holding on. That you need to really feel and acknowledge the hurt and hold that hurt in some form of loving presence in order to begin to soften, to hold it in kind of the wise heart. And in many ways, it's the same way when you're exploring letting go. In order to let go, it's so important to really see as intimately as you can what it's like to hold on. Because there's a lot we can learn in that. So, as, who was it? Someone whose name will occur to me at 2 o'clock this morning. As he said, unless you grieve fully, you will cry but not all your tears, and you'll laugh but not all your laughter. In that same way, when it comes to letting go, we need to really, really sense and acknowledge and see very, very clearly the nature of the clinging, the nature of the holding on. Unless we investigate that, nothing will happen. A story of someone who said they wanted to stop smoking, but couldn't stop smoking. And smoking is a really, really hard thing to kick. And kind of kept trying to let go of the habit. And then he heard about a very powerful way to help let go through neuro-linguistic programming. Basically, what it says, if you want to let go or change a habit, associate massive pain to not changing and massive pleasure to changing. So he elected to go to a cancer ward and to talk with people who had been lifelong smokers, who were dealing with all the accumulative effects of that. And when he really sat with him and looked very, very closely at the long-term consequence of his habit, that was very informative, because it really helped him to see what it meant to hold on. And then at the same time, he really took time to really explore, well, what would he do if he didn't have the habit? You know, how good would he feel, the money he would save? And he started streaming more positive to the change. And that helped him as well. And in the same way, when you're looking at a habit that you want to change, it can be really helpful to ask yourself, what is the long-term consequence of not changing? If nothing changes, what is the result of this going to be in the long run? And sometimes that can provide some really helpful insight as well. There's the classic story of Ajahn Chah in his meditation center, when he would wander around and interview people who were doing their practice. And he would ask them he'd say, tell me about your suffering. And they would talk about their anger or their aversion or their being lost in fantasy or their worry or their anxiety. And then he would ask, can you bear it? And some people would say, yeah, I can be with it. And then some people would say, it's too much. I can't. I'm really caught. And then he would always laugh and he would say, you have rope burn. You're holding onto the rope too tight. And so when you practice meditation, you get to experience the rope burn. You can see how the mind fixates or how it can't let go or what's unforgiven. And it becomes an incredible opportunity for really engaging into the practice with real wisdom and compassion. So I'd like to share with you a little process that I ran across this, maybe 20 years or so ago. And I found it to be really, really quite helpful. And I'll tell you a little story, and then we'll kind of try this on together. A while back, someone contacted me, and he was going through a really horrific breakup in a relationship. He really thought this was it, for him. And it was a very passionate in the beginning, and he gave himself to it fully, and met the parents, and family started to kind of merge and accept each other, and she started cooling off in the relationship, but he was so fixated on this idea of like family and the life they were going to make happen, and he kept trying to push and kind of make it work, and then finally one day she just said, I can't do it, and just left, and it was over. And so he was bereft, and he couldn't let it go. He just kept coming back again and again, and she told him in no uncertain terms, you are not my life partner, and pretty quickly got in another relationship. So he asked me, can you help me let this go and move on? I said, I have no idea, but I can ask you some questions, and we can explore and see what happens. So he was rushing into the let go and move on part. And of course, before you let go of anything, you have to very intimately acknowledge where the holding on is. So as he described, what happened and so forth, I invited him to really sense, what did it feel like inside? How was his nervous system holding this whole event? And he began to describe the wrenching in his heart and this twisted feeling in his guts, and make room for that. And he began to describe all the different emotions that he was holding inside. And I always like to think of this as the somethings, and for him there was something that felt really hurt. There was something inside that felt super angry. There there was something that felt just so deeply rejected, and there's sort of unworthiness. And there was something inside that felt deeply ashamed. And in many ways, that's kind of the hardest for him to name. That, he sort of declared to the world and his family, this is my future wife, this is the life we're going to build, and just the horrific shame that he felt. So that can't be rushed. But it really is around sensing, how does your nervous system hold this? And to make room for it. And then to sense if you can offer it some kind of loving presence, some empathy or compassion or kindness. And there was somewhat of a shift that he began to feel. And then I asked him these 3 questions. And again, you can't rush into these questions, but we'll try them on in a little meditation before we close. And I said, when you sense the totality of this, I said, could you let it go right now? And there was this kind of long pause. He said, I don't know, I'm not really sure. And then I asked him, gave him some time with that, and then I asked him, well, are you willing to let it go? Are you willing to let it go? And again, he just sat with that question for a long period of time, and it's almost like I could sort of like feel the question sort of working internally. And then again, he said, I think so, I hope so, I'm not sure. And then I asked him this question. I said, well, when would you let it go? And then again, kind of a long, long pause. And those questions are from a technique called the Sedona Method. And it's a really, really beautiful, beautiful thing when you're exploring something you're holding on to really name it, and then really take time to sense how is your body holding it. Really make room for it. Sense if you can hold it with some empathy and kindness, and then you can explore those questions. Could I let it go right now? Am I willing to let it go? And when would I let it go? And what I find is those 3 questions, they just keep directing your attention toward the possibility. And again, when we're in fear, there's no possibility. We're calcified. But this points toward the possibility of it. So, would you like to try this on? I'd like to recommend you not choose like your arch nemesis or like the deep soul wound you're carrying in your life. And we'll talk a little bit more later about you don't want to do this where there's any particular trauma. I just recommend that you try this on something mild, just to kind of get a sense of how these questions might work for you. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And we'll begin by just taking a little bit of time to kind of do a little inventory, go through the files. Is there something in your life that you feel like you're holding on to? Or it might be something you're irritated about. You're either judging or feeling judged. And if you need a little more time to find to come up with something to investigate, you can raise your left hand. Okay, if you can take a little time now, just to draw this a little bit closer, this particular situation. If you're visual, you might sense if you can visualize this as a still or a moving image. Are there any sounds or words you associate with this? And you might just sense inside. How does your body, how does your nervous system hold this event or this memory, where do you feel it? If you could let it get big or intensify it a little bit, can you locate it inside? Are there any particular emotional words that resonate with this feeling inside? Just sensing what it's like to let it know you see it, to see it clearly. Here's the issue. Here's how it lives in your nervous system. And you might just sense, if you were to hold this in some kind of loving presence, some empathy or compassion or kindness, how does that move or shift or change inside? And when you reflect on this issue, just to gently inquire and just to sense, what experience does this question point you toward? Could you let this go right now? Are you willing to let it go? And when would you let it go? Just sense if anything may have shifted through this inquiry. And just sense the possibility, if you could let this go, what would it feel like? What would it be like inside? And letting this now fall away, you can deepen your breath. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed if you like. Just a few minutes left. So was that helpful? Hopefully that didn't wreak too much psychic damage. But this brings us back to these 4 foundations of practice. We all get caught. Stress, suffering is part of the human experience. Anywhere you experience stress or suffering or dissatisfaction or unsteadiness, and you look for the cause, you'll see that it has to do with holding on. There's something holding on. Either there's a holding on in the body, there's a holding on to a story, there's a holding on to a belief, there's a holding on to an emotion. And the third principle is you can let go. And part of the letting go is the willingness to see it clearly, to call on the wing of wisdom, which is not to pull away from it, but to see it. And to call on the wing of compassion, to cultivate a heart that can hold it. And the fourth principle is that there are practices and all kinds of technologies that you can use that can help you to let go more and more and more. So it's easy to find ourselves wanting to rush into the sense of letting go and freedom. And what that can lead to is like this premature transcendence. When But when you take the moderate path, and just the practice of meditation itself, you begin to see more and more clearly what is happening as it's happening, and sensing how you're relating to it. You begin to open up the stimulus response mechanism, and rather than reacting to life, you can begin to respond. And in that little gap, that's where wisdom and intuition and creativity flow, where they may not have before. That's part of the miracle of this practice. So I'd wanted to talk a little bit about what is the radical letting go part of the practice, and we don't have time for that. We will talk about this sometime in the future. But in the meantime, I thought we might just close with a little 4-minute meditation, and we'll review a little bit of these practices. As you sense your breath, you might take a moment just to let your attention settle. What you hear is not yours. Can you let it go? What you smell, what you taste, what you see, what you feel is not yours. And you might sense in these final moments just a glimpse. Who are you right now without a story? Who are you right now without a concept of future or past? Whatever is not yours, let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. You might take these final moments just to wish yourself well. Can you imagine your journey, your path filled with a sense of ease and well-being? And can you imagine offering freely to all those in your inner circle and now to all beings a sense of well-being? May all beings feel the freedom and the peace of letting go. When you're ready, you can deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your kind presence. As it is Ramadan, we are letting go of tea and cookies, part of our letting go process. If you do have any questions about Insight on the Inside, you'll be in the lobby outside if you'd like to check in there. And we have no class next week. Happy Memorial Day weekend. And thank you again. Happy.